So, with ongoing conflict in Iran leading to notably higher gasoline prices here in the United States, I thought it might be fun today to talk about resilience and discuss how the middle and working classes of the United States have been systematically squeezed over the course of decades to the point of finding ourselves really struggling, more and more of us, with even just bare bones survival and keeping up with the cost requirements and the technology requirements, training and parenting requirements of the modern day, and steps we can take to make ourselves redundant and less likely to be so negatively impacted by our system. So, over the course of several decades now, a combination of corporate greed, government corruption, and overall political short-sightedness have really led to a situation wherein collective bargaining and the ability for workers to really bargain for benefits and for higher pay that matches the level of productivity that they've been bringing to the table for American business has really gone to the wayside. You have industry after industry, from Coca-Cola to Ford and other auto manufacturers to computer like hardware manufacturers and software developers, all charging what they believe and what their market research shows is what the quote market will bear. And when almost everyone is doing this, and especially the necessities in life, the housing and food and transportation and so on that are truly required for us to live our day-to-day lives, are all doing this, and then they've been doing it for the better part of half a century without really any meaningful regulation, because in our neoliberal government and regulation is bad agenda era, we have rolled back a lot of protections. Funnily enough, it didn't actually so much make business easier as it made exploiting the rest of us far more simple and far more consistent and easy to do without political and fiscal and judicial blowback. And so we found ourselves increasingly in a scenario wherein the middle class and whatnot is just at a disadvantage. And we are slowly over time getting squeezed year by year, month by month, and the 2020s have been really rough for that. We've seen a kind of heightened or sped up version of this since the COVID pandemic in 2020, and we're really feeling it right now, right? Years of grocery price increases that are still happening. Gasoline, at prices we haven't seen in a good long while. This feels like, in many respects, like some of the worst, like the early years in the Biden administration when inflation was really bad. It feels a lot like that, but we haven't recovered from the Biden years yet. And when the Biden years hit, we hadn't recovered from the slow growth Obama years after the Great Recession, which was caused in large part by reckless policy and business from the 20s and the 90s and even back into the 80s. So this whole setup, this whole economic and cultural and political system that we have is designed to not really care about us and only respond to the will of the people when they really have to and when there's enough anger to do so. And it really does feel like we're starting to get there. In the meantime, an increasing number of us are falling below a line wherein it's almost impossible to even functionally survive. And so I did want to discuss some ideas as to how to kind of make ourselves corruption resistant, right? Like those of us that can, in ways, little ways, sometimes big ways. It can go from having your own garden at home to, or even in an apartment complex, a little above ground kind of like series of pots or what have you. It can go into indoor grows in general if you want to get into more high-end hydroponics and like almost warehouse systems if you have enough land and like ability to do so and get that kind of thing set up. You can do aqua farming, and I know like in China it was, and I believe still is, fairly common to have like a complex layered setup wherein there's like ducks, there's various types of fish, and there's certain types of plants like duckweed and that sort of thing that are layered on top of each other on purpose to create a fairly self-perpetuating system that provides things like eggs and protein and so on, perpetually, as long with relatively minimal effort after the initial setup. And a lot of gardening and certain things like that have elements of that as well. And so the general idea that I wanted to bring to the table here and kind of discuss, and that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately, is just this idea of not needing this system around us. And so we can remove ourselves a little bit from the pain of the increases in groceries and the just arbitrary nature of the cost of living that isn't doing any of us any favors lately. Because it seems pretty obvious that nobody around the levers of power have any interest or real motivation to change things. And so on the one hand, I do think we should be getting angry and working on ways to politically organize and to organize at work and consider unionizing, but that a lot of that's difficult and a lot of that is relatively low level, and it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of grassroots work, right? And so I think in the shorter to mid-term, I think what's incredibly effective as well is that all of us increasingly lean on ourselves, our family, mutual aid networks in the community, start using social media for what it was originally intended for, right? Or what it was promoted as anyway, which is building community, and use if neighbors are growing different crops, for example, in their garden, or one or two of them have aqua farming and they're using, I don't know, different types of fish or different, species of duck or breeds or whatever, or what have you, of waterfowl or chickens or whatever people may be bringing to the table, then, trade, kind of reinstitute something of a bartering system. And it's something here in rural northern Arizona that my wife and I have been talking about with coworkers and neighbors and people around us, just like, hey, what exactly is it that, like, things are tough, and what exactly do you have, like that, what are you might be interested in trading, because here's what we're potentially offering. Like, my wife just traded some baked goods for some like grapefruit and lemons and basically just citrus from a tree, and it was really easy. And the reality is my wife was going to give, was giving this pie to this lady anyway, but it kind of worked out, positively for us. So it can start from really small roots, like a seed becoming a tree, right? It starts real small and very unimpressive and not particularly imposing in and of itself. But the United States used to be more of a farming-based agricultural system, and while far from perfect, one of the benefits that it provided to society was that many more Americans were varying degrees of more resilient and resistant to wide-scale corruption and economic depression and so on, because the hardest facets of society and of life that were required were things that they largely produced themselves or in their immediate communities. And there were problems with that when there were droughts and, other, like the Dust Bowl, for example, and things that really impacted entire regions of the United States that really hurt, right? Large numbers of people, because now you don't have a more broad-based system to kind of help pick up the slack and redistribute that pain so that people in those specific regions and places can survive in the way that we do today. Nowadays, if you had something like a Dust Bowl, you wouldn't probably see large-scale migration because most people live in cities and aren't tied to that agriculture anyway. So there are pros and cons to it. It's not at all that it needs to be, we need to just return to the past. We can very much take what is good about modern society, the technology, the communication systems, honestly, even artificial intelligence, if we're going to use it for things like monitoring our own gardens and that sort of thing, depending on the price and what we can do with it, There are perks to modern living, but we're now really starting to see the weaknesses in our modern system here in the United States as well, and society. And we've had decades of kind of a slow but steady breakup in the American family. And a lot of us, have, for various reasons, are just not really tied in to much of our extended family. Maybe nuclear, our immediate parents, siblings, maybe, our own children, etc. And that's usually about it. And so while turning back the clock on that to where we have more multi-generational homes and on farms that have been in the family for generations and so on, that probably doesn't really exist anymore, and it would be incredibly difficult and probably not even entirely worthwhile to try to go back to that. But a more modern version of it probably would be really helpful for a lot of us. And my wife and I have talked about this. So like the idea of homesteading and not necessarily completely living off the grid, but preparing for off-grid life, right? Trying to invest in solar, get batteries for solar, so that we can use our own electricity at night, and getting our own like water reclamation tank systems and gutter systems that feed into our own filtration system that we build or that have built on our property and so on. We're working on this, but a lot of it is rather difficult and expensive, and a lot of us don't have the know-how, myself included, right? I don't know how to set up a lot of this stuff myself, so I watch YouTube videos and so on, and then usually contact a professional if I want to actually look and work on actually implementing it. But it's expensive, it's a multi-year endeavor, and even getting into a home is difficult, and it took my family moving from Central California to Northern Arizona to just get land or find land that was inexpensive enough to actually get a decent amount of it. So it's a challenge in this day and age, and not everyone could do this even if they wanted to. At a certain point you would have if everyone was just deciding, hey, we're only switching to remote work or gigs that we can work part-time, and we're all living on in communes, and moving out into the middle of nowhere to on vast tracts of land that we all work together, like that's a lovely idea. A lot of us could do it, and honestly, as I think about it, it actually might be good to kind of push the economy to that kind of breaking point, because that would challenge the powers that be. So it's not that I love the idea of a lot of us doing it and giving a lot more leverage to those that stay behind, because there just aren't as many workers and whatnot. I actually think that would be a fantastic thing to see in society, but it's really difficult to do, especially as the first wave, and not everyone can do it while maintaining the redundancy that we have in our system. So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. So that said, even little things would be great. Like my wife and I we're started off really just like growing herbs and just really some basic stuff. And now we're trying to move on to things that are a bit more advanced and see what we can do. And my wife loves baking and cooking anyways, so she's tried to connect with neighbors and kind of develop relationships in the area and with coworkers by introducing baked goods and pies and cookies and lasagnas and all sorts of other stuff of that nature. But bottom line is we as a nation, I think, are being pushed, whether we like it or not, to either work ourselves into the ground to probably still need to take on debt to live. And that's where a lot of us are at now anyway. And it will likely continue to get far worse before it gets better, unfortunately. Or we need to start really looking for alternatives. And I know like 10 years ago, right, I heard a lot about hustle culture and getting side gigs and so on, but we only have so much time in our day and so much ability to work side hustles and start our own businesses. That is great if you have that opportunity. Again, not all of us can be self-employed entrepreneurs and starting our own businesses. It's not sustainable for an entire civilization or nation state to do it. We could have a lot of us do it, and again, it would probably give the workers that stay behind a lot more leverage, right? So I would like to see more momentum developing there, but there are concerted efforts. The powers that be want to keep us in the habits of consuming entertainment and working W-2, jobs and paying our taxes and living on the grid and relying on their energy sources and relying on their housing networks and so on, because that's what's best for them. And that's what keeps the system going as it does. And they've also kind of stacked the deck, if you will, in regards to trying to do anything different. It's difficult nowadays. You can't just go out into the middle of the woods and start a commune, like even getting the land there, and then incorporating if you want multiple people to live there, and paying, you still have to pay property taxes, and there's just one thing after another that you still, even off grid, is still at least somewhat tied into our system, and it does not favor those of us that don't earn money in more traditional manners, because we still all have to pay taxes in the US dollar. So this is it's just the reality for a lot of us, that even in a best case scenario, we're still going to need to be adaptable and careful, and realize that complete disconnection is very unlikely. And even if you leave the United States, you're gonna face a new set of challenges, right? So my family and I have talked and thought about that as well, right? Like, what if we try to work remote and move to Mexico or Panama or something like that, right? And that may be and seems to be a good option for some people, but even then, you're still dealing with bringing a lot of these American problems wherever you're going, and that a lot of the Western world is kind of dictated by American economic policy, and is coerced through institutions like the IMF to institute more neoliberal policies, and so it's impacting almost the entire world, whether we like it or not. So I think taking little steps. First thing is to start talking with your loved ones, those that you live in homes with, those you're roommating with, people in your neighborhood, co-workers, and think about your own interests and your own preferences, or if you have a green thumb or an interest in gardening, or if you have an interest in woodworking, or if you work with computers and know how to put them together yourself. Like, it doesn't even have to be going back to the earth kind of things. It can even just be having and developing skills that are useful in the modern economy, but may not necessarily generate enough income, or really much of any, not enough to justify leaving your job for, but could be helpful in like a mutual aid community kind of scenario. I think the way I'm starting to think about it is, like, if the government collapsed today and the nation fell apart, and, like, say we got hit with like an EMP or something like that, or a big solar flare just took out our electrical network, and all of a sudden we're without power and we don't have internet and so on, what do we do, right? And some of these are really, like, they're actual possible or plausible scenarios at some point in the future. And so I think it's good to start building and thinking about it from that base, and that's what I've been trying to do. Doesn't mean go full survivalist and, again, disconnecting from society, but just thinking about it, keeping that in the back of your mind, and then starting to take slow, steady steps towards making yourself a buffer, and giving yourself a redundancy and a resiliency in a system that increasingly shows it really doesn't care about our well-being collectively. And we may have a political revolution, we may have a physical, violent revolution that overturns this, and maybe things are different in the relatively near future, but we don't know. This system may continue getting worse as it has over the last 50 years or so. It may continue for another 50 or 100 or 150 or what have you before there's any meaningful change. And in that meantime, what are we doing for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren, and for humanity thereafter? Because I think it's a little bit short-sighted to be like, well, I just won't have kids then, or whatever, right? Whatever our response is to that, but say that's your reaction, is just, well, I won't have kids, this is a terrible scenario to bring kids into. Like, well, functionally, compared to other times in human history, this actually isn't that bad. We can get through this. We will get through this. Humanity is good at surviving, and we've survived through far worse than this, and we've had far fewer numbers of us than this before. So we can do it, and more than likely we will do it, even if it's not ideal. And in the future, these decades are remembered as the good old days because we ruined the climate or what have you for others, and the economy or whatever, right? So, but we need to be thinking about the future, and so I think this is a good way to do it. So from multiple perspectives, this leads us down a path that, regardless of what the future looks like, we're sitting prettier than we were before. And so I think that's some good food for thought, and something that's really been on my mind lately as my wife and I have been chewing on budgeting and the reality of gasoline prices and trying to pull back and be more careful with groceries and trying to make ourselves more redundant and resilient and careful in this world. So, anyway, I think I've been on my soapbox enough for today. But anyway, if you want to continue hearing about, politics, ways to survive in this day and age, and ways to cope with it, and maybe even ways that we can adapt positively, stick around because we'll definitely be talking about it.